The truth is that the idea of education for citizenship in the United States assumes something that's kind of a given, which is that we know what it means to be a citizen. But if you transfer that idea to the state of Israel, the issues become, in many respects, a lot more complicated. Not that they're actually not complicated if you think about citizenship and education in the United States, but most of us, when we went through this sort of thing, it wasn't for us complicated. We sort of assumed that we were becoming Americans. The American identity was something that we aspired to affiliate with. As Jews in particular, many of us children of immigrants, first, second, third generations, wanted, in fact, to acquire that American identity. So civics was something that we may or may not have liked the subject. We may have thought it was important or not important, but it was something that was a given for us. It wasn't something that we raised as a matter of problematics or questions. But the truth is, in most countries around the world today, certainly in the United Kingdom and Europe, probably also in the United States, in South America, and without question here in Israel, the question of citizenship is not altogether a given. Both the basis of citizenship and what it means is not a given, and the ways in which one goes about educating for it are not altogether clear. Of course, most of us are used to thinking about Israel as a Jewish state, or sometimes in a slightly more complicated or complex version, a Jewish and democratic state. Some people would say that the democratic part is contained in the Jewish part. Some people would say the democratic part is exclusive of the Jewish part. But what exactly it means to be a citizen of a Jewish or a Jewish and democratic state for the multicultural and diverse populations of the state of Israel today is not an altogether simple matter. So we've prepared for you a panel discussion today in which we're going to try and lay out some of the complexities. Representatives of people that have done some research and thinking about what it means to be a secular Jewish Israeli, and how does that fit into the idea of what it means to acquire or offer some sort of education and citizenship. For that population, what does the state of Israel actually mean in relation to their Jewish identity? Or does it mean anything at all in relation to our Jewish identity? To what degree in the second or third generation, or for some either the fourth generation of life here in Israel, under the auspices of something called the National Jewish Revival, what does the state of Israel actually mean for those people? And what does it mean about their Jewish identity? And what does it mean about their citizenship identity? That is to say, their civic or national identity. Not national in the sense of ethnic affiliation, but national in the sense of political affiliation. One of the hardest things for Americans oftentimes to understand, particularly for American Jews, is that for many Israelis, probably for most Israeli Jews, to be Jewish for them is like what it means to be American for an American citizen. So that the education and citizenship, which for many of us educated in American high schools, was a way of acquiring a political identity, which we differentiated from our religious identity on the grounds of separation of church and state. For many Israelis, to acquire an education and citizenship is in fact to acquire a form of Jewish education, that is to say, education in political affiliation with that very Jewish and democratic state. Now that's all well and good, and it sounds all nice, except that well over 16, 17, 18, perhaps 20% of the citizens of the State of Israel are not Jews. They're mostly Arabs by ethnic or national origin. Many of them define that national identity as today Palestinian, which is itself a complication that we need to discuss and address. Some of them are Druze, which may or may not be Arab in ethnic orientation. That's also a matter of debate. Some Druze consider themselves Arabs. Many Arabs consider the Druze to be part of Arab culture. Some Druze choose not to consider themselves Arabs, also itself a complication. There's also Cherkessim and other affiliated groups, Muslims, Christians. But a large portion of the Israeli citizenry are not Jewish citizens of the State of Israel. Identify perhaps with the democratic character of the State of Israel, to the degree we hope that it is democratic. Though, as you know, the State of Israel, though, as you know, the State of Israel has complications also with regard to the way in which it handles a variety of different minority populations. Not worse, perhaps, than any other liberal democracy across the world, if Israel is a liberal democracy, but certainly not better. So what does it mean to be educated as a citizen under this so-called Jewish and democratic state when one, in fact, doesn't identify with the Jewish part of what it means to be a member of the state, and perhaps with the democratic part, though one might perhaps be critical of the way in which that democracy carries itself out vis-a-vis the minority populations in the country. And then, of course, there is a significant population, probably equally as large as the Arab population, that consider themselves religious, that are mostly Orthodox, in large measure Orthodox. I'm a kippah-wearing Jew. I don't identify as an Orthodox Jew, but I do identify as a religious Jew. Probably most of my religious ideas are closer to Nomi's than they are to anybody else's around the table that I normally sit with in the State of Israel. Most of those who identify as religious identify as Orthodox religious Jews. And that also has a variety of complications today that are becoming increasingly difficult. Religious Zionism, as you know, was a form of revolution not only within the Zionist movement, which had begun as a secular political movement, but also within Orthodoxy, which had a great deal of ambivalence about the idea of Zionism to begin with, because after all, to return here and to create some sort of national identity, particularly a national identity that had religious connotations, could be interpreted as a kind of theological rebellion against God. It has a variety of difficult and complicated connotations within Orthodoxy, and religious Zionism chose to embrace both forms of that dilemma fully on and very squarely, and in fact embraced in large measure with great enthusiasm the victory of Israel in the 1967 war, the return to Jerusalem, to the Kotel, and to the symbols of Jewish national and religious revival as a kind of signal that perhaps we are on al-saf, a messianic revival. What some of us even like today to say in the Birkat HaMazon, another place, that the creation of the State of Israel is Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, that is the beginning of the flowering of our redemption. And so there is deep and profound theological and religious ramifications to the creation of the state, and not only secular ramifications. For them, the Jewish dimension perhaps is thicker and more profound than for that secular group. And yet, especially the recent departure of Israel, the disengagement from Gaza, the dismantling of settlements, created a deep ideological crisis within that segment of the community. To what degree should their loyalty be first to the national revival known as the State of Israel? To what degree is their loyalty first to halakha and religion? To what degree do they feel that the state has in some sense betrayed them? After all, we sent, and now I speak in Israeli, we sent really our best and brightest to establish what were wonderful communities, communities lemofet. They were communities that were really model communities in many, many respects in the Gaza Strip. And then 30 years or 40 years on, after people had established their lives there, raised their children there, built schools there, and buried their dead there. We tell them now that okay, 30 years ago we told you that this is what you need to do in order to be loyal Zionists and to bring about a further Jewish revival, and now we're telling you have to move out. And that creates a deep and profound conflict. I'll speak plainly, I was among those who was in favor of the disengagement. I thought it was a worthwhile thing to do and an important thing to do. But that doesn't mean that it didn't create profound and deep conflicts for that population. And so for them, what does it mean to be educated as a citizen in the State of Israel? What does it mean to have that political identity, which is so complicated in the way in which I have described it, and where might my loyalties or ought my loyalties first to rely? As it happens, Nomi and Shar Yashuv were among the leaders of the national religious movement in trying to sort out the complications of that theological revival. And I remember having a number of moving and dramatic, for me, conversations with Shar Yashuv about that very issue He actually went on record as saying perhaps we shouldn't think about Israel in terms of theological terms. Perhaps we shouldn't call this as the beginning, flowering of our redemption. And I went to him to say to him, no, you can't say that. You can't speak. You can't abandon the theological consequences of what this means for us without that. Sort of hot off the presses, as it were, deep involved in the issues of the day, I was delighted that Naomi was able to join us. So you're going to sort of hear the complexities across the spectrum for all of us, which are the realities of that mosaic, multicultural, complex mosaic called the State of Israel. And then, of course, in the final analysis, after we've sort of laid out some of the issues from what we've done in our research and our thinking and our own personal experience on these issues, we're going to turn it back to you. Because we talk all the time about what it means to teach Israel in the American Jewish educational context. And oftentimes the Israel that we teach about in the American Jewish educational context doesn't actually bear a lot of relationship to the complex reality that I just laid out and described for you, that is the reality of the State of Israel here, in all of its great accomplishments, in all of its profound failures, in all of its deep deliberations and difficulties. Bringing those issues to an American Jewish public is not so easy. It's not that, of course, parents don't hear it on the news. It's not as though people don't see these things because, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know which, it's laid out for everybody to see in plain daylight. But how we interpret these sorts of issues for kids in schools and what it means to do that interpretation I don't pretend to have any answers for you. I don't pretend to come forward with any simple solutions to what that means. But I'm hoping that the discussion that we have afterwards, in addition to asking a lot of questions and clarifying and whatever else might be helpful to you, might lead us in a direction to thinking about some of these issues for American Jewish education and what that might mean.